Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Learn session, Disability Support Documentation Solutions. Today is August 9th, 2022, and we're super pleased that you are here with us in person or watching this session recording. Just a few words on what Learn is. Learn stands for Lifelong Education and Aging Resource Network. And Learn is an Idaho-based nonprofit organization with a mission to provide free community education on aging and caregiving topics. We are a leaders network of the Society of Certified Senior Advisors. The SCSA is an organization that educates and certifies professionals who work with seniors and caregivers. A disclaimer, for all of our content that you hear today or watch on our website, please keep in mind that the content is provided for general informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, financial, or health advice of any kind. We ask that you please consult with your legal, financial, healthcare, or other service providers before you take action based on this information. I do want to make a few brief introductions and thank yous. So importantly, we want to say thank you to our sponsors for our summer series, Peggy Farnworth, Boise Retirement Coach. Boise Retirement Coach helps you plan for your retirement journey from pre-planning through legacy planning. And Peggy Farnworth has been a founding member of Learn since 2020. And Granny on the Move, Stacy Gunderson from Granny on the Move has also been a founding member of Learn. And she and her company act as the general contractor for seniors who can no longer live at home independently as they navigate that space and find the supports they need to age well. And today it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Kay Spears from My DO-D-A.D and various other activities, including My Places Community Events. I didn't have it on here. I should have put it on here. My Places Community Events. And I'm going to let Mary introduce herself so that she can make sure we understand the breadth of her experience and what she brings to us today to share. With that, I'm going to stop sharing and allow you to introduce yourself, Mary. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Dara. I am Mary Kay Spears. I have a lifelong experience in healthcare from the time I was born, which was in a group home. My parents ran one for the Association for Retarded Citizens with 9 adults, and we lived there till I was 5. I'm a third-generation caregiver. My grandmother taught special ed and was the Caldwell Eagles Special Olympics coach. So pretty much all my teenage years, I was a bowling coach for Special Olympics. And from there, I got my CNA out of high school, worked for different development centers, res habs. I ran an assisted living for a while, and currently, I am doing support broker work with the DD waiver self-direction, and I've been in that position since 2012, and I've been a community support worker for people with intense and dual diagnostic needs since 2006 when self-direct started. So I've done all the direct care positions. So I put a lot of that knowledge and experience into this presentation to help caregivers kind of understand how to start showing their work instead of just talking about it. So unless Dara has anything else to do, I'll start the slideshow and start talking.
That sounds great. Thank you, Mary.
Please feel free, anybody, if you want to interact and say, have a question, feel free to just unmute the mic and ask. I would love to, I like interactive classes because, let's face it, we all respond better when we're talking to people versus just kind of preaching, right? Okay, so let me share my screen. All right. Come back over here. All right, as you see, we have, it's called Disability Support Documentation Solutions for Learn, but in setting up these slides, because I'd actually never set this up in a slide, I realized that that's not the best title for what I'm going to be teaching today. And welcome to the Principles of Person-Centered Documentation. And the reason why I want to make sure that we understand that it's person-centered is we want to focus our documentation over the person that's receiving this care and supports. Currently, there's not a standard for documentation for direct caregivers in home and community-based settings because of how wide their services and supports go. You can have an individual who's receiving disability support services who needs, maybe Meals on Wheels, or maybe some assistance with bill pay or home maintenance, to somebody who's 24/7 G-tube fed with diabetes and wound care. The standard and the amount of supporting documentation and understanding of their care is going to be hugely different. So we need to be able to understand the principles, the elements and the principles of person-centered documentation and person-centered planning so that we can right size our documentation and create that standard for that person. Previous methodologies behind documentation has always been the outliers. And if anyone is familiar, I am specifically talking about the DD waiver. For the last, 20 years, we've used the CIS-A, which is not the CIS-A, the CIB-R, which is the scales of independent behavior. And you're supposed to say, well, this person can do what by themselves. But that doesn't ever illustrate how much we're doing as caregivers to support them. And then it becomes either a roller coaster of, well, they can do this stuff on their own now. Well, that's because they have this support from us. Without that support, they drop. It's like if you have someone who needs a wheelchair to get out of their house and you give them a wheelchair, hey, look, they're getting out of their house, they're done, and they're like, oh, look, they're getting out and they're achieving their goals. Well, they don't need this wheelchair anymore. That's kind of what the old system did. And so this has caused the documentation dilemma. The documentation dilemma is pretty much that. Everybody has been programmed with this idea that documentation is about how bad it is, how hard is the work, what are all the things going wrong, and that's what you should get your eligibility and your support based off of. That's not going to help long-term achieve goals, because if you're focused on the problems, you're not looking for solutions. Person-centered thinking was introduced in the federal home and community-based services in 2014. And I seriously encourage everyone listening to this to look at taking the person-centered thinking training for themselves. Their Idaho Council for Developmental Disabilities, it does have classes for the person-centered thinking and person-centered planning. And all of our elements and principles are based out of that person-centered module. If you want to look at the federal home and community-based supports services, you can. There's the website here. Basically, the federal HCBS funds 70% of waivered services to the states on the Medicaid side. So understand, from a federal level, 70% of any paycheck you get as a caregiver, if your person gets waivered services, is going to come from these standards of person-centered thinking. Well, what is person-centered thinking? Because obviously it must have been good enough that they put it into federal law, we hope. Actually, I took the person-centered thinking class last year. It was really good because it stops emphasizing on our symptoms and behaviors and it comes to the base component of what is important to this individual and what is important for this individual. Now, as a caregiver, generally we're going to lean toward what's important for this person. But if you're going to write a goal or set an outcome that is achievable, the person has to want to do it, or it's not going to happen. And this is what they discovered as social workers, caregivers, the ones that founded the Learning Center, who are the ones that put this as a grassroots into federal law, was that they discovered it's like we have these amazing plans that have been written. but nobody's following them because they don't like them. And so it's like, we have all this great information of how this works, but unless we pair it to what's important to people, they're not going to achieve their goals, even if it's what's important for them. It's kind of like a diet. You know, it's important for us to eat vegetables, but it's important to us to enjoy our food. You've got to pair the 2 and the 4 to make things achievable. And so this is why I looked at, we need to focus, and documentation is an aspect that is in the person-centered planning, but I've delved into this a lot with helping people understand the supports that they need for the people they care for. And so I've developed this around that person-centered thinking and utilizing other trainings and, you know, my 200 plus hours of continuing education I've had to have as a qualified support broker. So how do we get this doing? Like, good documentation is not just showing how bad your job is or how much you've had to clean up, what end it comes out of. You know, that's not what documentation should just be about. It should also be about looking at the factors around that and how to navigate through it. If we know Jim is always going to throw poo at someone, we find out who that person is and we find out why Jim is doing that, and then he won't be throwing poo at him. I know it's kind of a no-brainer, but so is CPR when you've done a class every year, or for the last 10 years you've had 5 CPR classes, right? Everyone here has taken ongoing training of a skill that you already have. What training should do is put those into an alignment so that you can utilize them to develop your own methodology for keeping good documentation. That's what I want to do today. All right. So, how do we show the effectiveness of person-centered planning, and how do we reinforce? That's the crux of the documentation dilemma. And how do we show the support someone's going to need if it's not available? If somebody is nonverbal or unable to communicate verbally, how do they tell you what they need? Well, it's really helpful if you have someone that's worked with them in the past. So, what we're going to work on today is discussing the principles of person-centered documentation, the thing I feel is important when we look at giving supports to individuals, the elements of person-centered documentation, and these are the things that help quantify care so that it can be measured and shown for anyone who would step into that care setting. Setting up good documentation allows you to step away from being in the middle of care all the time. And who here suffers from caregiver burnout? How do you train someone coming into a situation with intense need people if you don't have a roadmap to give them? So, principles of person-centered documentation that we've come up with is, first, everyone deserves support. We need to document supports, not symptoms. Consistency is the key to success. Collaboration, not dictation. And objective data is your best support tool. So, everyone deserves support. Not everybody wants support. Let's be clear here. Let's go back to the 2 and the 4. Just because someone doesn't want something doesn't mean it's not important for them. And we're not alone. No man is an island. That's a very old quote. And we all give and receive support from each other every day. There's natural supports versus paid supports. But when you set an alarm clock in the morning, you're giving yourself a support. Whenever you smile and pat someone on the back, that's support. When you're transferring people in and out of their wheelchair, that's support. And it's important when we're being paid for the support we give to know how much support we're giving so that, 1, we're compensated for it adequately, and 2, if we're not there, whoever needs that support gets that support consistently. Document support, not symptoms. This is a really important principle, I feel, because back to that old model of people thinking documentation is writing down how hard it is, how much, what did they do wrong, what maladaptive behavior, how much did I have to clean up, people think of that when they think documentation, and it's been like a year trying to get people to understand when I say we need to take good documentation. Everybody's like, eh. I'm like, why are you upset at taking information that can be used for other people? It's because everyone's been programmed with this old style that they don't think of the opportunities having what the support you're giving can do in the future. So support not symptoms is, how is what you're doing supporting them? Well, if Joey cannot get dressed and wants to go to the movies, it's very important that you support Joey in getting dressed so he doesn't get arrested. I mean, that's kind of, so supporting him to get dressed means he gets to do something he wants, which again, if up until this point, Joey's like, I don't want to get dressed, if you pair, you need to do this to what you want, Joey will be much happier to get dressed if he knows he gets to go to the movies. Again, what is important to them to meet these goals? Because if we can, everything we do is motivated by our desire. We don't get out of bed unless we want to. And I know I have wanted to cancel days due to lack of enthusiasm. But at the same time, I can look and go, okay, but I need to do this. And if you don't have the ability to understand what's important for you, then what's important to you is all that you have in front of you. Next. Am I going too fast, or how's the pace, everybody?
I think it's good.
Okay, cool. All right, let me take a drink. Hydration is good for you too. Consistency is the key to success. It's one of the oldest adages we use for everything. Practice makes perfect. If practice makes it work, practicing it consistently. I didn't practice this slide well enough. Practice makes it work. Practicing it consistently makes it stick. This I'm going to touch on a little bit because the thing I discovered when I implemented this in my own life as a caregiver is when you first start documenting this way, it's going to feel like a slog. Slog is the only word I can think to describe it, because if you wait to the end of the day, you have so much to put in, it's overwhelming if you actually start thinking of every element that you've used. And we'll get to that. But if you practice putting in those supports in the natural lulls of your caregiving experience, you can start getting better data in the moment. And we all know we forget things throughout the day. You get in bed and you're like, oh, I forgot that one thing. Well, if you can just write it down as you go, then you don't forget, and then there's a record of it. So consistency in doing this documentation is very important. Also, everyone has predictable behavior patterns that are waiting to be discovered. And when I say waiting to be discovered, it's learning the things that make people excited. You don't have to just learn triggers that make them upset. You can learn ways that get them excited about participating in their goals and their outcomes. If you know that someone loves going on drives, you can then incentivize them and say, okay, we get the thing we need to do done, and we'll get the thing you want to do. We pair those together and we go. But the other thing is medications and hormonal cycles. Like, science has shown even men and women have hormonal cycles. And if you can see those patterns in the amount of supports you're giving, you can start understanding, oh, here's all the indicators that a storm's coming up. Let's make sure that we, one, take it easy on ourselves because this is a predictable pattern. And two, let's see if we can try something different to change the pattern. These are tools that are powerful in giving good care and making better outcomes. I love this one. Is principle 4 is collaboration, not dictation. How many people have worked in a setting where you do charting or notes or behavior logs, and the person you're working with will toss that thing out of your hands because you're tattling on them, because you're writing things down about them and they don't know what you're doing, and obviously it's bad because you're writing it down. Again, back to that old school way of documentation of everything that goes down is bad. Well, let's flip that script a bit. If we explain and show them that we're writing down what we're doing to support them, there's an aha moment that happens. And at this point, my gal, if something happens and I have to do it, she'll be like, did you put that in the DO-D-A-D? And I'm like, you're right, let me put that in the DO-D-A-D. If something works, put it in your documentation. And when I say DO-D-A-D, I'm not talking about anything proprietary. I am saying do daily activity documentation. DO-D-A-D. Okay? My DO-D-A-D is my product. A DO-D-A-D is do daily documentation activity, or daily activity documentation. So I just want that very clear. But yeah, at this point, and I remember when we first talked about how to document to get her the support she needed, because I wasn't enough just by myself as her caregiver. And we're like, we need to write down how we're helping you. And she's like, I hated when I was at the development center and they took notes about how bad I was being. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I want to write down how I'm helping you succeed. And that's a powerful thing, because then the person you're caring for can become just as much a part of their outcomes as you are giving them supports. Which, I don't know about you, but being able to know that I am collaborating with someone for their success is so much better than feeling like if they fail, it's because I didn't provide the right support. Documentation shows what you're working on, not just their problems. Now, if there's behavior logs that you need to, like if somebody bites you, please write it down that you were bitten, because they should know that. But on the other hand, if you just need to give them a little bit more support because they're having an off day or they're tired, these things can also indicate medical issues. It doesn't have to be just behavioral. There have been lots of studies recently showing that behavior issues increase with pain and being uncomfortable. And some parents will take their child into the doctor and they're like, oh, they have an abscessed tooth. Well, no wonder they've been pounding their head into the wall. They're trying to create some hormones to get some relief. Becoming more objective in what's happening and the support you're giving lets you step back away from it just being an issue to how you can provide support to either get through it, prevent it, or understand what's going on. Like I said, I love making people an ally in their own care, because then it's not just, okay, what's our goals this year? Oh, I think I'm going to do this. Well, how are we going to do this? How can I help you do this? How can I help you maintain your independence? How do you need help with this? That's huge for people. Any questions? Okay. Principle 5. Your data is your best tool. Objective data is your best tool. I love it when I double type. You ever notice that? I was talking, your brain like takes words out and you see it properly and then you read it and like, wait, I didn't do that. Happens to the best of us. But anyway, this is why we also use hash marks, because then you're not using as many words. At least that's my opinion. So, did you need something, Dara?
Nope, I was just agreeing with you.
Okay, cool. When you are putting these supports into a measure that anyone that comes onto your team can use, you can then pull those reports out and see, okay, objectively, we're just looking at what supports were being used. And we'll get to those when we talk about the elements of support and how those are measured. But being able to look at, say, okay, this caregiver, let's say Molly works half the week and Tammy works the other half of the week. Why does Molly need to use twice as many verbal supports as Tammy? Well, let's talk. Then it becomes a point of not what the person did wrong, but why they are putting the data that way. Maybe our person just really doesn't like Molly. Maybe they like Tammy better. Maybe they have a crush on Tammy. These are questions we can then ask instead of just hearing Molly say, "They never listen to me." Well, here we can show that you're right. You have to use twice as many cues as she does. I didn't know that it did that. I guess there's a lot more that we can talk about making data objective when we can pull reports about the interventions we give. But yeah, being able to use objective data and not just your personal experience is huge, especially when you're going to an assessor. Someone who is determining your person's supports for the year. The long-term care reviewer does it on the A&D waiver. Liberty does it here on the DD waiver in Idaho. And those assessors need to have understanding more than, well, how often do they need this support? Oh, maybe once a week. Well, was it actually once a week?
So Mary, a question for you. So you've alluded to this a couple of times, and I would love your thoughts on, sounds like it's been effective for you to include the person in your care in the documentation process, as well as in sharing the documentation and the data with them. Do you have any examples or stories of how that's been helpful?
Yes. Personally, I can think of the gal I work with has mental health as well as developmental disabilities. And she can understand things if we break it down to her comprehension level. And so the obvious trend we can see when her medication, she gets one of her medications is in a shot form. And we can see by her behavior and the needs that she has when she starts showing different symptoms of her mental illness when her shot is becoming less effective. And we can show her that and say, okay, hey, this is shot week. We know that we're going to have this and we're going to have this. Let's add a PRN at this time to help us. And then she can see that, yeah, I can see my shot's wearing off. I'm going to need more help. And then it's not her mental illness is controlling her. It's giving her the power to decide how she's going to use the tools and supports that we've developed with her to prevent herself from being overwhelmed by her mental illness. That's huge. Power. It's huge.
Yeah, power.
Knowledge is power. This is giving knowledge. And it's not a he said, she said thing. But the other thing is, you're showing this information. You're not telling the assessor. And I have a great example too, is sharing it with the other members of your circle of caregivers. we've been able to do med changes very effectively without needing hospitalization or second guessing or trying 10 different avenues, because we can submit our med log and we can submit our, tick marks of when they're showing different mental health issues. And they can literally see on bar graphs using, graphing out the data that we've provided. They can say, okay, this is when this med's dropping off. If we add a med at this time, let's see how that works. And then it becomes incremental in med changes, and they're not drastic. You can also see when meds stop being as effective. You can also see, oh my gosh, if you have, how many people have had one doctor tell you one thing and another tell you another thing, and then you talk to a third doctor and they're like, oh my gosh, don't put those medications together, because you have different specialists looking at different things. But if you can give them a full picture of what's going on, both subjective and objectively, you can encourage those better outcomes. Did that do it, Dara?
It did, actually. I really, I think oftentimes we think about documentation being something we do like after, behind the curtain, and really this brings it into part of care, which I think there can be a lot of benefits to. So I just found that very interesting. Thank you.
Well, and not everybody wants to talk about their hardships, but they are happy to talk about what they need to prevent them.
Well, and their successes, for that matter.
Right. Because then, again, back to the old way, if you showed the successes, oh, you don't need as much help. How many people felt that way? That the more success and goals that you accomplish, the less support you would give. It created an entire feast and famine mentality with assessments. Either you're going to get all of the supports because you've been very blatant about how terrible it is, or if you even say, hey, things are getting better, they're like, oh, I guess you don't need this. It's terrifying. All right, so why bother? This is a great slide to go into. Well, for caregivers, it's pretty simple. If you don't write it down, it didn't happen, and you can't get paid for it. My best example of this was, again, back to doing it consistently, and that first 2 weeks was hard. I've gotten into a groove now, but that first 2 weeks I started doing this and making sure I took my documentation. It was hard, because realizing you're doing a lot more than you think. And that's the thing about especially parent caregivers or family caregivers. You're going to do it no matter what. But if you're not there, someone needs to be able to do as much as you are, and consistently. And there was a point where it's like, the person I'm working with has 10 goals on their support plan. And when the assessor asks me, how many verbal cues does this person need? I'm like, they need a verbal cue for every goal. Now, I said they need a verbal cue for every goal that we're working on. There's 10 goals. So 10 times 10 goals a day times 7, that should be 70. I should be getting paid for 70 verbal cues a week, right? Does anyone want to guess, when I actually was taking the hash marks, how many that was in a week? Come on, guesses.
Double that.
Almost.
Yeah.
Actually, it was more. It was 156. So, literally, if you just think about it mathematically, and this is not how exactly it works, but if you break down all support payments from Medicaid are going to involve pay rates. We can't do anything about that. I'm not going to even touch it. But we can show them how many of those units of the pay rates that were working. So if I submitted my time card for 70, I'm going to get this amount. But if I submit it for 156, I'm going to get this amount. And it's huge. Also, from a care perspective, if nobody understands what you need, you're not going to get help for it. And if everybody already assumes that you're having a problem and it's behavioral and not looking at the supports you're needing, they might miss something medical, psychological. They might miss something social. Like you're just lonely. So you throw a ball at someone every time they come in, because if you throw a ball, they have to stay longer to do more charting. This good documentation supports good solutions. All right. So, person-centered support for caregivers, perspective matters. What gets measured gets managed. In the old way, all we were measuring was how bad things were. So that was the only thing getting managed, was the bad stuff. So are you managing what's going wrong and going from crisis to crisis to crisis? Or are you managing the supports that make people successful? Because as a caregiver, we want people to be successful as they can be capable. And when you're dealing with elderly, that's going to keep going down. And the more you can support them to continue as much independence as possible, the better they feel about themselves. The better they'll work with you if they feel like you're not just babying them and giving them the ability to work on things and feel normalcy. Is that a thing for all of us? Being able to feel like we can accomplish things? That's what we want, right? We all want to be successful in our goals. Everybody we care for wants to be successful in their goals. How many people here have worked with somebody with a developmental or cognitive impairment, and you just know all they want to do is help people? All they want to do is help people. Well, they just need supports to do that. And I know, because that's how I have seen people that I would think wouldn't be able to do a job. They work at Sweet Zola's now. My gal worked at the Habitat for Humanity resource store for 2 years. And yeah, it was only once a week, but you know what? That was her job and she loved it. And she helped make sure that those minimal tasks that she could accomplish herself were done so that other people could do other things at the business. That's empowering and impactful. All right. Now we're going to talk about elements. Anybody have any questions on my principles? Any that that I missed? This is my first presentation, so I'm just kind of like making sure I got this. Like I said, we put all this together. My partner JC and I, he was super helpful in helping it look awesome. Hope you guys are enjoying this so far. Our designer Rocio made it look gorgeous, so it's not all me. I just have done all the work of caregiving. They did all the work of pretty, so shout out to the people in my life that are my supports, because everyone deserves support, even you, even me. So, elements of person-centered documentation. Judy, I see you. Are you writing things down? Yeah. You can have this as a printout if you want it. So it's okay. But I'm glad to see you taking notes. That means that I'm engaging. Cool.
It's posted in the handouts on our website already.
Wonderful. So, duration, frequency, intensity. The DFI of documentation. And then we put it all together. So, duration, most people understand the concept of time. Except for the people we care for. Duration is, how long did it take you to do this activity? How long are you spending? Because back to that example, when you're talking to someone who is doing an assessment, let's take, for example, Alan, who is a young man who is physically very capable, but needs, some cues to help remind him and keep him going. And then we have Tina, who needs full support and has, mobility issues and cannot physically brush her own teeth. Which one's going to take longer to brush their teeth?
How long is it supposed to go for?
Till 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock? Okay.
Yeah. Obviously, it's going to take much longer for our person that needs us to, physically do it for them. Again, back to if we're being paid, are we being paid for 5 minutes to cue someone or 30 to 40 minutes to do it for them? So understanding how much time someone needs also means you're not late for appointments. If you show up on shift and it takes an hour to get someone ready to go for their thing and their doctor's appointment's in a half an hour, you're going to end up rushing them through their care, and that's going to cause a whole host of issues. Frequency. How often are you doing it? Back to my example. My frequency was 156. And that's going to change based on the day. Some days we're going to have really good days and we're go-getters, and some days we're not. And it's important to understand how often you're actually doing that thing. Okay? Those are the easiest of the elements. Intensity is the one that we got to break up, and those are the intervention levels. It's like, how much effort is this? Now, this scale, the intervention intensity scale, is pretty universal for when you're doing cares. That's independent, gesture, verbal, physical assistance, or you have to complete the support. And I've added refusals in here because, and this is out of order, and I added refusals in here because, and we'll talk about that at the end, why I feel it's important to make sure we're giving people the option to refuse things. So, first observation is independent, or you observed it. Now, why it's important to note when someone does things independently is to verify they're capable of fully doing it. It's very frustrating to walk into a care environment and be told that this person can do something independently, and yet they have a history of, let's say a young lady has a history of UTIs. And you're like, that's weird. And then you actually one time get the opportunity to assist her and you realize she's not wiping correctly. Suddenly you can eliminate a medical issue and creams and doctor's appointments by helping her and reteaching her that skill, or making sure that that is being done. The other thing is ask. My ask story is kind of funny. I was making the assumption, which is never a good thing, that the gal I was taking care of didn't know how to fold towels. This was a very bad assumption for me to make. And one day we were doing laundry and I asked her, I'm like, hey, can you fold the towels? Because I was seeing if she could. And she did. Really, really well. And I look at this beautiful stack of towels and I go, when did you learn to do that? And they're like, well, when I was a teenager, I volunteered at the YMCA and that was my job. For 2 years, I'd been folding their towels and I didn't have to. Ask people. Talk to them. Make them part of their care. And also make sure they get that credit. Because if they can do it themselves, saying good job is the best way to make sure they keep doing it. How many times have we stopped doing something that we could do because nobody appreciated it? I'm going to put component, gesture, and verbal together on one slide because the current tool that's going to be implemented is the supports intensity scale. This is on the same level, but when you're doing really in-depth behavior modification, they'll separate gesture and verbal. So gestures are pretty simple. What am I pointing to? Gesture is when you get someone's attention without speaking. You just point and you're good. And verbal is asking or directing someone. I like to stress whenever you're in a care environment to ask people first. I know it seems silly and something that you would think, but there have been many times I've walked into situations where I hear people demanding that their client, their participant, their care person, you need to do this now. And that's the first thing they say to them. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't respond well to that. We need to remember we're taking care of people. And ask. And that's again, this best way to find out if they can do it independently first. Because then you don't have to ask again, you could just point if they know how. And then you're reducing the amount of interventions that you're giving them. Physical assistance is when you're physically helping them, transferring people in and out of wheelchairs, transferring people in and out of the tub, walking with someone with a gait belt and preventing them from falling. Anytime you're physically interacting with that person, that's physical assistance. That is obviously more intense than pointing or letting them do it themselves. Now, when completed by support, it's when you have to take care of the task for them. Now, this is important, and when it comes into that because let's face it, there are things that are important for people that they could care less about. If somebody has no concept of money, paying bills is not important to them at all. So that is when the support person needs to make sure that that health and safety purpose of making sure their bills are paid or taken care of. Now, if the person is helping you do the task, I consider that to be physical assistance instead of completed by support. And the example I will give you for this is I know a person with cerebral palsy who has a bachelor's degree in education. And the only reason they're not a teacher right now is because they couldn't get the accessibility to go teach. They are completely cognizant. They know exactly what they want to do for their lives. They're just physically incapable of doing it. So their support people are physically assisting them. They're not completing it for them. If the person is directing you because they're physically unable, that becomes physical assistance versus completed by support. And that's how I separate those concepts so that we're being very accurate in the kind of support that's being given. Because if somebody has no ability to understand the need, that's when the support needs to step up. And that's a higher level than being directed to do something physically. Does that make sense to everybody?
So completed by support is a higher level because it's full responsibility. Is that
correct? It's if the person has zero concept of that thing needing to be done. It's like if somebody is completely incontinent, if you have to change them and they wouldn't make any attempt to change their own soiled linens or body, that is being completed by the support.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So my son, I dress him completely. However, he will help by putting his legs out to put in his pants or something like that. So he's aware that I'm helping him, but I'm also has to fully do it. Otherwise he's not going to do it himself. What would you consider that? Because he is trying to help, but he can't do it on his own.
I would consider that physical assistance.
Okay.
Because if he is, like I said, if he is aware that this thing is being done for him, then If he can communicate like what outfit he wants, or if he wants this shirt or that shirt, that's him being involved in that.
Yes.
Whereas if he is not engaging with you to determine what clothes he's wearing, that becomes completed by you.
Okay.
And that's why I separate those that way and make it very clear that when you complete it, you are the beginning, middle, and end of that support for that individual.
Okay.
And so this also helps encourage the ability that if you see things that are only being completed by support, are those goals you want to work on? Is this something the person might be capable of? And if they're not, they're not. And that's, again, that's we're not documenting their problems. We're documenting the support they need to be successful.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for being in the class. All right. Component 6 is refusal. It is important that we all be able to say no. Like, that's like a basic human thing, right? If you felt like you couldn't say no, that's when abuse happens, neglect. Being able to say, I don't want this thing, is important for self-advocacy and important for making people part of their program, part of their care, whatever's going on. Being able to say no is important, as long as it's not causing a health or safety risk. It is difficult when working with intense needs people who have self-injurious behavior or self-destruction, that health and safety, and this is part of the 2014 law, that if people want to live in an environment that is not an institution or a group home, and they want to live in their own home, that their plans include health and safety ways that will allow them to live in that environment of their choice. But at the same time, if somebody has periods of fugue state when they go into a state where mentally they're no longer there and they're physically acting out or injuring themselves or others, if it's safer to enact a health and safety plan that requires restraining them until that passes, that's allowed. But you have to talk about them talk with them about it when they are lucid and able to make those decisions. You don't want to just enact health and safety plans if somebody's refusing. It needs to be an actual life, death, maiming thing. If somebody is yelling at you, you don't restrain them. If somebody is trying to walk into traffic, you should. And health and safety is important for all of us because, again, without support, we wouldn't be here, right? Like, support is how we live. And so this is, again, refusal gives people the ability to say, not right now. Let's say they're in the middle of their favorite show. If you start by asking, hey, can you do the dishes? And they say, no, right now. No, not right now. I'm watching my show. That's a perfectly legitimate reason for them to say they don't want to do the dishes right now. This is their life, and we are providing support to them. So, any questions on that? All right, cool. So, ways we can apply this. All of this stuff I have given you. Lots and lots of information. You can do it all in your head. This is bad. Do not try to keep all of your documentation in your head. 1, you don't have a printer. 2, that comes out. 2, the human mind forgets things. 3, we can glaze over. And unless you have an eidetic memory, and even if you do, you shouldn't keep this much information in your head. It's not helpful. And how many people at the end of the day just feel like their head is full? Just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe all the things that happened today. if you've been slowly downloading this information as you go, it takes some of that stress and weight off of you. Solution 2, keep it on paper. Keep it simple and keep it accurate. And we're going to do a quick little demo. I have it printed out, and I'm going to bring my camera over here and show you how to do the hash marks. Super simple. This works. I have sent 100 pages of these into care managers to get plans approved, because that's the level of support that person needed. And I wanted to make sure that it was showing how much those is. It wasn't, it wasn't me saying I need verbal cues for every goal. It was they needed 157 verbal cues. There is power in that knowledge to get the supports that you need for people. The third option are digital documentation management. There are do-it-yourself tools. I used one for a while. It was called the behavior observation tool, but I didn't like it because I am not a tech person. I do not want to try to figure out how to build those forms and then implement them, even if it's a handy dandy app on my phone. But if that works for you, do it. My DO-D-A.D is a tool too. Those are the ways that we can take that. But whenever you plan to use for your person-centered documentation, use the principles and the elements that I have taught you so that you can do it both subjectively in a, hey, we did all this today, and objectively as these are the amounts of supports that were needed for success. This isn't how terrible it is to work for this person. These are the amounts of supports that we need so that we can focus on success. Okay, so from here, we're gonna show you a paper one. Pretty sure, yes. So now we're gonna show that, hold on. I'm gonna stop my share for a minute. Still getting good at Zoom, right? Any questions?
Looking forward to some examples.
Cool. We're gonna talk about examples. So I'm going to stop my video really fast as I move my camera. Yep. No blurring the background. All right. Can everybody see this? And as I said, DO-D-A.D is do daily activity documentation. I did have somebody ask me, why do we do it daily? And that's back to that waiting to see behavior patterns, waiting for understanding this thing. Yes, it might be very routine and it might be the same 4 days in a row, but maybe that one day is off and odd. And so it's important. So the way this sheet works is we have, put the day, your date. This is if there's something specific. This is for if we have something specific for our goals. We can mark independent, gesture, let me get it, verbal, physical assistance, refusal, and staff complete. So let's start out our day. This morning, if we help someone take a shower, let's say we started with, hi Tina, good morning. Are we going to take a shower this morning? That would be a verbal. Let's say Tina does not wash her hair well, but she's able to grab the shampoo bottle, but then she needs us to help put the soap in her hair and help her rinse out all the soap. And she's able to get out of the tub. And this is, again, if she needs that. Let's say we get to dressing and she decides that she's going to wear something really cute and pink, and she's going to get everything good except for, well, I'm going to say she gets dressed all by herself. Cool. Let's say you say, okay, and then like I said, we're getting back up. There we go. Then we get to teeth brushing. Well, I don't want to brush my teeth this morning. Okay. Now, if we want to redirect Tina, and let's say she really needs to, we can say, Tina, we're going to go out. We're going to go out for an event today. Do you really want your breath to stink? Oh, well, Tina doesn't want her breath to stink for her friends. So maybe that becomes 2 verbals because we've asked her and then we remind her that if she wants to go and not have her breath stink, that she needs to brush her teeth. And then maybe we point at the toothbrush to say, hey, we need to do that. And we can go through each one of these things and see how that works. And let's say Tina is not able to get her own medication, but she's able to swallow it. She's not able to administer her own medication or put it in the tubes. So I always put that as a staff complete, because if they don't know how to get their medication, that's a staff complete. But if they swallow it themselves without being asked, that would be an independent. Now, the thing you can do for your own, again, creating your own documentation is if somebody needs help with walking or ambulating, you can determine this is the goalpost for this event. So for example, somebody is a fall hazard. Well, if they need a gait belt, that's always going to be some form of physical assistance. But if you know that they can take some steps by themselves and they need standby assist, that might be one physical assistant and then they walk 50 feet without assistance. But if they fall, it would be physical assistance, or if they fall and they need help, it would be a staff complete. And this is where it gets to that point where there's no standard for documentation because it's got to be based upon what that person needs. If somebody is a diabetic, you're going to be tracking how often they get sweets. If somebody is a fall risk, you want to track falls. If somebody has impulsive eating, you want to track how often are they needing support to redirect them from eating when they shouldn't. Anything else we want for examples on how these work? Like I said, it's really simple. And then at the end, if there is a problem, you can write it out, and you can also do an activity log of what they did for fun. But then you'll see the thing they did for fun from the activity log, but you also know it takes all of these cues and all this support in order for them to do that fun thing. Any questions? And it is 1:05. Sweet! I made it in my time frame.
You did indeed. So any questions from anyone on the phone before we wrap up today's session with thanks to Mary? I think the example was really helpful. It looks like, there's kind of an outline, but I'm assuming that if every time, for example, on the medication example, if the care support always has to sort the medication, but the person can independently take the meds, you could break that into 2 lines so that it's more clear what
Yep.
the care support is doing.
You can condense or expand any of these depending on what level of support the person you're caring for needs.
Okay. And then will you share a little bit, you mentioned that, there's 3 types of documentation. 1, keeping it in your head, not recommended. 2, paper, better than nothing.
Paper.
And digital solutions. I would like you to share in just the last few minutes, Mary, the solution that you have developed in case people are interested in following up with you, since you didn't talk about that solution.
No, I was told very specifically that I'm here to talk about documentation supporting and not to just promote myself. Aha!
Yes. Well,
So, okay.
We don't want you to
promote,
but you have permission to now share what it is you do. Now that you've provided that education, we want to make sure that our users have knowledge of everything that's available.
Of course. And as I said, there is what I worked on with my business partner, JC, who is here, I believe, is we developed My DO-D.A.D, which is at MyDo-D.A.D.com, and we have a tablet interface that you can utilize, that we sit down with you as fellow caregivers, as a team, and say, okay, what supports do you need? And we customize all those lines, and then we have a tablet that you can either buy or lease out that is preloaded with our program, and you can just carry it with you through the day. And when you click that you did for example, it's divided into the ADLs, IADLs, med log. You can keep your med logs on here. You can keep tracking for behavior interventions. We've worked with a behavior interventionist to determine what those graphs need to look like to, again, work on that behavior modification piece. And you just click in. Oh, JC.
He's just giving us a contact.
Cool. Yo, caregivers, happy to answer questions about person-centered documentation made simple, and he left his email right there. But it's a tablet interface that we sit down with you, and we'll train your team. I've sat down with about 4 different teams and gone, okay, first, let's all take a deep breath and go, we're all here for Team Mary. We're all here for Team Dara, okay? We're all here because we believe Dara deserves the best possible life, and this is how we're going to support her in doing it. And we talk about goals. We talk about the supports that Dara needs and the intervention she might need to keep herself safe. And we line it out, and then we customize it for the person. And they can, instead of hash marks, you have a tracker, and if you don't like typing, there's a voice to print solution that will just write it out for you. And then we do monthly reports that you can take to your other caregivers. And like I said, it's been invaluable with my gal's med manager because we can see those patterns, and I can train my staff, my other staff that work with her, because it went from me being 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, to now having the supports to pay for 2 full-time staff and me in order to care for her. And she can get out to things she wants to do. She's not stuck at home. If we have a family thing at our house that we don't want to do and she doesn't, she can go do her thing. She can involve, and if there's an issue with any of her caregivers, we can sit down and have a staff meeting. And it is powerful when the person can sit down and say, I don't feel safe with this. And you go, okay, how do we help you feel safe? This person's doing this person's doing this. Well, we can all take a lesson from this person and start doing this thing better. Or we can take a lesson from this person. And then it's not you're bad staff or you're not doing well. It's empower everybody in that circle. And that's what our team wants to do. We want to work with the families and teach them this and help them create those solutions.
So thanks for sharing that. And so for those of you who are here or watching later, if you are interested in a digital solution, My DO-D-A.D is one that is available. So encourage you to do the research to find the tool that is best for you and your loved one, or the person in your care, for sure.
Remember, everybody deserves supports, especially you as the caregiver.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting to think about how this supports both the caregiver and the care recipient really beautifully when fully utilized. So
Collaborate, not dictate.
sounds good. Well, I want to say thank you very much, Mary, for providing such an informational, thorough, and thoughtful presentation on person-centered documentation and the benefits of that. And you can see here some, My DO-D-A.D, and it's mydodad.com if you're interested in learning more about Mary's business and where she has taken person-centered documentation with this initiative with her partner, JC. And then just a special second thank you to Peggy Farnworth at Boise Retirement Coach and Granny on the Move for supporting and sponsoring the summer series and making it possible for us to bring these sessions to the community free of charge. Without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to do that. And we are happy to be able to bring this information out to the community and make it accessible on demand.
Thank you, Dara, for this opportunity. I really enjoyed doing this.
Well, I'm so glad you were able to be here. For those of you who have not attended a session with Learn before, you will receive an email following the session inviting you to join our mailing list. We do require that you opt in, so be on the lookout for that invitation. We do not sell our mailing list, and all you will receive is information about great education sessions and events that are available for you. And please check your junk folder if you don't see that email come in. We'd love to have you be aware of the information we're bringing to the community. We have 4 more sessions upcoming in the summer series. Again, our sessions span the continuum of aging and caregiving. So in August 23rd, we'll be doing starting a retirement side business. August 30th, a focus on low-level light therapy with a class called Shed Light on Your Pain. September 8th, a really important session on discussing the future with aging parents and dealing with some of those difficult topics. And then we'll wrap up the series with Signs of a Scam on September 20th. All of these sessions will ultimately be in our video library. So if you can't make the session, please check the video library and catch it at your convenience. So with that, I will thank you all for being here. For joining us, and hope you will join us again for a future session with Learn. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, everybody.